Hello, I am Ghanwa Hakim and you are watching the Arabic Hour. On today's program we have two guests, Artist Jesseca Ferguson and poet and bookseller Beau Beausoleil, on the topic of the Al-Mutanabi Street Starts Here project, a response to violence in Iraq from the letterpress and book arts community.
I think it's hard for artists to feel that we have a voice that's listened to. And that's one of the reasons I like this book arts exhibition, because it is in fact getting a huge amount of attention.
There's a great essay in the anthology by the Iraqi writer Lutfiya Al-Dolemi. And she starts out her essay by saying, no matter what the documents of my birth show, what province I was born in, this is where I was born. I was born on Al-Mutanabi Street the day that my first book came out.
Our first guest today is Jesseca Ferguson, a Boston-based artist working with the Al-Mutanabbi Street Starts Here, a response to violence in Iraq from the letterpress and book arts community. Jessica currently works with pinhole photography. Her pinhole photographs and collaged photo objects have been included in solo and group exhibitions in the United States and in Europe. The Al-Mutanabbi Street Project, developed by Beau Beausoleil, who we'll hear from later in the show, is a response to the March 5, 2007 car bombing on Al-Mutanabi Street in Baghdad. The street is the historic center of Baghdad bookselling and held bookstores and outdoor bookstalls, cafes, stationery shops, and tea shops. It had been the heart and soul of the Baghdad literary and intellectual community. Jessica speaks about the project's call to book artists to join the project in hopes of reassembling some of the inventory of the reading material lost in the car bombing of Al-Mutanabbi Street. And now to the interview. Jessica, thank you so much for being with us today at the Arabic Hour. It's definitely a treat to have you and to listen about your work.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm glad to talk to you.
So before we actually start about our discussion with the Al-Mutanabbi Project and your involvement with that project, I'd like to learn more about you as an artist specifically and see what your journey was towards the Al-Mutanabbi Project. Can you speak a little bit about your art?
Sure. I work with pinhole cameras. Those are very primitive imaging devices. Basically a darkened box. Camera obscura means dark room. A camera is literally a dark room, a dark chamber. They have no lens. They're very simple. I also work with 19th century or handmade photographic processes. And I'm also very interested in books as subject matter and also as raw material. So the book aspect does kind of feed into the Al-Mutanabi Street Project.
So your work is Boston-based. Do you explore other areas of artwork? Have you been an artist for a long time?
Yes. Well, I suspect I was an artist since childhood. I was always drawing and making things, but I did go to art school in the 70s and, kind of made that commitment to being an artist as a way of life. So it's a long time. I started with pinhole photography in 1990, but before that I made collages. I've worked a lot with paper. Paper is very important to me, and I was also a weaver using hand looms for a number of years.
So the Al-Mutanabbi Project is a fairly large project. I mean, it's been on for a few years at this point, and it involves many different artists from many different places.
Right.
Can you explain about the project a little bit in general and what it does encompass?
Sure. The Al-Mutanabi Street Starts Here project was originated by Beau Beausoleil, who's a poet and bookseller from San Francisco, and then he's got a counterpart in England named Sarah Bodman, who's very involved with the book arts world. And the whole project came as a response to the March 5th, 2007 car bombing of Al-Mutanabi Street in Baghdad. It's, as you know, the literary and artistic heart of Baghdad. I've never been there, so you might be thinking, well, why am I involved? But I heard about it and was very disturbed by the news. And what can I do? I'm a pinhole photographer in Boston. How can I speak up about something that is particularly distressing to me? And I didn't know it, but other people around the world had heard this news, and particularly Beau Beausoleil, and he started asking poets and writers to write about it, to do readings, and to make broadsides, which are large pieces of artist paper upon which an image or text is printed using letterpress, which is an old way of making text going back to the 15th century, or earlier actually. And so the project grew, and he originally was going to, he put out a call to the book artist community, and he originally was going to stop at 130 artists. And the reason for that was the figures of the casualties on that day. 30 people died and 100 were injured. But so many people were interested from so many different countries. I think it's over 25 countries. You can see on our website the exact number and who comes from where. That they decided to go with 260, twice the number. What Beau did was he asked each artist who became involved to make 3 books. And 2 of the books would circulate wherever they could be shown. In the US, in abroad, we've got, I know, a show in Egypt coming up. There's one in England right now, all different places. And then a 3rd set would be donated in its entirety to the National Library of Iraq. And also a set of the broadsides. And I believe the broadsides have already been shipped to the National Library, which is very exciting. As a gesture sounds like too slender a word, but a way of expressing a commonality between artists and poets from around the world, not just the West, but from around the world, with Iraq over this particular incident, which for me personally is a deep one, because when you destroy books, you are destroying culture and the cultural memory, and that's very painful. I mean, it's been done many times. We know this. It's not a new thing. But I think this particular incident really was one that artists wanted to respond to. And I'm grateful to Beau for giving me and many others that opportunity.
So when you connected first with, with Beau, the founder of the Al-Mutanabbi Project, were you planning on being as involved as you have become, or were you, falling in love with the project as it went?
Yeah, that's a good question. The way I became involved was just purely by chance. Anya Gilmore, who is originally from Poland but lives in this country, is a friend, and she's one of the artists in the project. And she was over, we were working in my studio, and she said, "Oh, you must know about the Al-Mutanabi Street Project." I said, What's that? I didn't know what she meant. And so she told me about it, and then she wrote Beau Beausoleil about me, and he looked at my website and asked me if I would join, and I thought it sounded really interesting, and I'm not a book artist particularly at all. But I got intrigued, and then he wrote me kind of a cryptic email, and he said something like, "Will you wade out into the deep water with me with this project?" And I had this funny feeling that I was going to be getting involved, and I wrote back and said, "All right, what are you thinking of?" And then he wrote and said, "Well, I think we should bring the project to Boston." And I just started getting involved. And I didn't know it was going to become basically, I would say, a bit of an obsession. But I think it's because I'm grateful for the chance to do something positive. I really believe that the arts make it possible to talk about difficult subjects. And if we don't do it through the arts, we're in trouble. So if I can help, that's what I want to do.
So why was Beau so particularly interested in Boston and bringing his project to Boston?
Well, I think that's a good question. Boston is a literary and artistic center. We have lots of universities. We have writers. We have writing programs. We have poets. We have authors. We have art schools. I teach in an art school. We have an intellectual community that would be responsive to this. Also, Boston has been known as forward thinking. Massachusetts was the first state to put a law in the books for marriage equality. We are the place where the abolitionist movement started. We've always been ahead of the curve on issues about segregation. I like to think we're a progressive state, so we're, I think, a good choice.
And your contributions with the book art, can you explain what book art really is?
Yes, that's a really good question. People work in many forms: photography, painting, sculpture. And then there are a lot of people who literally make books, and they're called artist books. Sometimes, Picasso made them, sometimes a famous artist collaborates with a poet, puts something together, and they look literally like books. You can turn the pages, we would recognize it as a book. Maybe rarefied special papers, but we would say, yes, that's a book. today, many people are experimenting. The books are three-dimensional. They could be made out of unusual materials. They might be what's called a pop-up book. You open a page and then other things come out. And there are a lot of artists dedicated to this as their art form. And since it was a bombing of a literary area of cafes and booksellers, it seems like a logical way for book artists to respond. And a lot of times, book artists, well, some people I think are very quiet and they just make their books, but others are thinking, how can I use the book as a way to carry a message? So it's an interesting community to ask to respond.
So what are some of those messages that the artists are hoping to convey with their art?
I think some are messages of mourning, disappointment, sorrow at the loss. Some are messages of outrage. Some are calls to action, saying we can't go on like this. Books are important. We need to read. We need to convey information to each other. You can't stop us. Those kinds of messages.
During the war on Iraq, you know, the cultural canopy of the country was essentially destroyed. What makes the street bombing that significant to the artists that are involved? You know, there's a lot of culture and a lot of history in Iraq that made it the center of the Arab world and of the world overall in terms of its substance. Why does this particular event stick out so much in your mind?
That's a really good question. I mean, as a Westerner, an American who did not support the war, I listened to the news and heard many disturbing things. I was very upset with the looting of the National Museum. I mean, I'm an artist, that just really pained me. And that was huge, and I think that bothered a lot of people. But there was something about the scale of the bookseller's street when, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but when I heard that, I just felt sickened, sad, horrified, angry. And I thought, how unfair. I can go into a bookstore. I am safe. I can buy a book. No one's saying, oh, you can't buy that book, you can't read that. I have a deep privilege. And I heard about people, not only was the privilege of reading a book, buying a book, selling a book, but their lives were taken away for the simple act of you know, believing in books and spreading information and freedom of expression. It went very deep. I mean, I'm very upset by things like book burnings, you know, on Babelplatz in Berlin in World War II. You know, it's outrageous, and I remember it very vividly when I heard the news and on the radio, and I think it affected a lot of people who think about these issues and care about them.
You know, art in itself is a very emotional creation, and particularly when you're creating art for a response to such an emotional and devastating situation. Do you feel like that inspiration has made your art a little bit different in this element?
That is a really good question, and my work is usually very contemplative, and it's often about memory and loss and history and includes books. So it's not a huge leap. But to actually make a book, and I'm not an artist book person, I had to rethink it. And I have a very dear friend who's a poet named Mina Alexander, who's originally from India, grew up in Sudan, India, and England, and now lives in the United States. She's a poet. We met well, 20 years ago at an artist colony, and she wrote a poem called Fragment in Praise of the Book that's in the Al-Mutanabi Street anthology. And we decided to collaborate. So I'm taking her text and I'm printing the text using a 19th century photo method called cyanotype, which is a beautiful blue. And I'm taking the text that she ordered very carefully, and then I'm cutting it in strips and disordering it, but gluing it and sewing it together in a way that it becomes a thread of paper and text, and then I'm wrapping it in a ball of text and putting it in a box. And so you can unravel it and read it, but it's out of order. And I think that books are a lot about order and creating a world. And when you do something like bombing books and where they're sold, where they're made, where they're printed, where you can buy blank paper to write on, you are disordering things. But I want to put it back in order, and I want to make that possibility ongoing. And I mean, I think, and Mina and I have talked about this a lot. Mina's very involved in issues of border crossing, living in different cultures, freedom of expression, art and war, poetry and war. So I think it was just one of those very lucky things that we knew each other and we just wanted to work on this together.
That's, you know, I'm actually very moved by your description of your work, and I'm sure our viewers would love to see your work and the work of the other artists. Are there upcoming shows and exhibits within the Boston
Yes,
area?
and I'm glad you asked that. We have a website, which is www.Al-Mutanabi Street Starts Here -Boston.com. You can see things there. I can also give it to you. We have 3 shows in the Boston area. They're at the Cambridge Arts Council Gallery. It's a 6-month project. Each show is about 80 of the artist books, 80 to 85, and is up for 2 months. We've had one show where the second one just started, and we're having this big week of events with Mysoon Pachachi and Beau Beausoleil in town. So you can see things, but the website is good. And then we'll have the 3rd show will open on May 13th.
Beyond the artwork, the beautiful artwork and expression of the project, what's the hope for the project in reaching its viewers, in sending the message? What's the purpose?
I think that's a really good question, and I think every viewer will come to the show bringing his or her own history, and you know, some of it, the people who've come to the shows and the events have been very diverse. Art school students, people from the Arabic-speaking community, art lovers in general, people who love books, literary people. So it's been kind of a crossing of worlds. So I think those people have already been thinking about these issues, perhaps, but I'm hoping that with the other events as well, we will reach other people who maybe don't think about artist books or didn't know about the car bombing. Actually, one of the book artists in the show, Chantal Zakari, who's also a faculty member of the museum school. There are 3 museum school faculty members, Chantal, Laura Blacklow, and myself, and then a number of museum school alumni. Chantal brought her advanced seminar, which is about text and image, to the show. They were fascinated. Each student picked a book. In some cases, they picked 2 books. Some of them actually wrote the people who made the books, and then they gave a PowerPoint discussion at the Arts Council. It was wonderful, and every single student said they had not heard about it. They didn't know, and they were their eyes were opened. And that day that panel took place, 2 other museum school faculty members, John Schultz in printmaking and Ann Pelican in book arts, brought their students. So that was about 50 people. And the night before, we'd had a panel discussion locating Al-Mutanabi Street, where we had 5 speakers, different people in the book field, and 2 of the book artists, and we had another 50 people. So that, you know, so it was a real range of people just in that 24-hour period that were exposed to the information. And the shows of books are traveling all over the country. Like, for example, these 250 books that we have now, they're being packed up and they'll go to the Center for Book Arts and Poets House in New York. This show ends June 21, and then I think July 10 to like early September, it's going to be on view in New York. So that's another audience. But meanwhile, you know, that's only one set of the books. That other set of books that I mentioned is going to be traveling around, and maybe 50 books are here in California, 50 books in Nevada, wherever they are. If you go to the website, you can see a complete listing, and it's quite amazing.
Earlier you had mentioned that art form as an effective way to speak of controversial issues, issues that are, you know, hot and cold with a lot of people. Do you find that through your art and through your expression and through this project in particular, that the response to the project has been more controversial or less controversial than it would have been if the ideas weren't being expressed through art?
I think what happens when you have an art exhibition or a poetry reading or some other event around the exhibition is that it it provides a gathering place for people physically to gather and speak and look and examine ideas from a different perspective. And it lets them arrive at conclusions in a different way. If you are only on the receiving end, watching the news or hearing it on the radio, you're getting information in one way. But when you physically come to an event and you see artist books and you hear people talk about it, it provides a space for ideas. The same way a bookstore does, and the same way Al-Mutanabi Street did, and the cafes. It gave you a place where you could go and be open to this kind of exchange. And it isn't always easy. In fact, I really wanted this show to come to Boston, or certainly to New England, but Boston was number one. And I tried a number of venues, and some people were not interested. They just had reasons. Oh, how are we going to display the books? Well, the books, some of them are better than others. In other words, they were saying they weren't all at an equally high artistic level. And that is true. Some of them are more grassroots, but most are at a very high level, and many of the people in the project are actually very accomplished artists, and certainly the poets and literary people. So I think some people were uncomfortable because it had to deal with the war in Iraq. I mean, I really do. And there were some people who didn't answer my queries, and I was surprised. And even with the events, trying to publicize events about getting my soon to speak at schools and things, some people just haven't answered me. And to me, it's a very compelling opportunity to look at something that a lot of people don't want to look at. And maybe they just still don't want to look at it. But luckily, there are people who do, and we have a lot of very good things happening.
In your opinion, is the war on Iraq, it's created more controversy in whether it was illegal or legal, whether it was just, unjust. All of those issues are now coming to light.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we recently passed the 10-year anniversary
Yes.
of the invasion and of the war. Do you see that more people within your artist community, within the global community, are becoming more aware of those issues and more able to critique the war rather than just say it happened and it's unfortunate?
Yeah. Yes, although in critiquing, what can we do? I mean, I know it's important to say yes, it's wrong, and I think a lot of us knew that. I mean, many people I know, and I was one of them, marched when Bush was starting all this, and we didn't support it, but it didn't stop him. So I think it's hard for artists to feel that we have a voice that's listened to. And that's one of the reasons I like this book arts exhibition, because it is in fact getting a huge amount of attention. I mean, it was written up in the Huffington Post online, it was on The Economist online. I mean, a lot of people know about it. And if we had just said, oh, it's really too bad, I marched against the war, but what could I do? People wouldn't be having those discussions. So I think it's bringing it to different audiences, and I think it's helping people talk about it, maybe people who didn't want to admit it to themselves. Another thing that's very interesting, and this links with my Soon, and I don't know if you know how you wanted to talk about her, but and her visits, is 95% of the people who are in this book arts project are women, which I think is very interesting. I'm not sure why, and another thing that's important, and I think it should be, something like 70% of the artists are from the United States. And a good, I might be wrong on the percent, but many. And I think we should, because look at what the United States did. I mean, it gives me a chance to at least speak up about something that I really did not support, did not agree with. And I think a lot of artists feel that way.
Thank you. Do you
You're
know
welcome.
about, you said that some of the art was being given to the National Museum in Iraq. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process?
I don't think it's going to the museum, it's going to the National Library
Oh,
and
sorry.
Archives, in Iraq. And I am not involved with that, but Beau Beausoleil could answer you. My involvement has been more, how can we bring this to Boston and give the students, the general populace, artists, literary people, a chance to look at it and talk about it. That's been my focus. One of the artists, Kathy DeForest, who's out in Oregon, but she came here recently, she did I think an Indiegogo fundraiser, and that raised $13,000, and that is paying for the shipping of the books and broadsides, because you don't think about it, but they're quite heavy, and they're being shipped all over the country, and then to ship them to Iraq is quite expensive. And I know the broadsides went. I don't know when the books are going. So,
Jessica, you know, your description of your work and of the project itself is truly inspirational, and
thank you.
You know, we're very happy to have been able to discuss this with you, and especially because of the, you know, contribution that you're giving to the reculturalization of Iraq. We're hoping that our viewers can come and view your artwork. If you don't mind telling us again when in the month of throughout June 2013 they're going to be on display.
Right. Well, there's one, the show number 2 is on right now at the Cambridge Arts Council. If you just go to the Cambridge Arts Council website, you'll see it. And I forget exactly when it comes down, but the second one goes up the third opens May 13th. And if anyone is in the Boston area this week, tomorrow night, which is Monday night, April 1st, Maysoon Pachachi and Beau Beausoleil will be reading in the gallery from 6 to 8 p.m. The next night, April 2nd, Maysoon will be showing Our Feelings Took the Pictures, Open Shutters, Iraq at the Cambridge Public Library, and she and Beau will have a conversation afterwards. Thursday night, she'll be back at the Cambridge Public Library at 6 o'clock showing A Candle for the Shabandar Cafe and talking about her film school in Baghdad. And Friday night she'll be at the Center for Arabic Culture in Somerville, again with Beau Beausoleil, showing images that the women took in the Open Shutters Iraq movie, and talking about that, and Beau will be reading from the anthology, and again a conversation.
Jessica, you've also been involved with bringing other artists to the Boston area. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, Beau Beausoleil is coming, the originator from San Francisco, thanks to support from a foundation out there. And then we're very excited to have Maysoon Pachachi, the London-based Iraqi filmmaker, coming for a week, and that is thanks to a grant from the Mass Cultural Council and the Cambridge Arts Council. And I'm very excited that she will be showing her film, Our Feelings Took the Pictures, Open Shutters, Iraq, which is Eugenie Dolberg, who's a journalist based in London, invited, I believe it was 5 women from Iraq, different towns, different educational backgrounds, different economic backgrounds. They were smuggled to Damascus, which was safe at the time. I think it was in 2005 or 6, so it was before the bombing. And they were taught about photography and invited to speak about their lives as women. And they drew life maps, really talked about their personal histories and how they were living under the situation of war. Then they took the cameras, went home, documented their lives. They came back again a number of months later, and Maysoon was with them the whole time, embedded, filming them. And the images were edited. They had an exhibition, which has traveled. There's a catalog called Open Shutters Iraq, which I brought and showed to you, which is in Arabic and English and has images. And one of the photographers was a little girl. At the time she was 6. Her name is Dima. And you get to know her through this film. Maysoon sent me a DVD of the film. And I just feel very strongly that women in this country, everyone in this country, but especially women, should have a chance to see this film. And as a photographer myself, and photography, pinhole photography, has been my voice for many years, to think of women not being able to use cameras and being taught about the history of photography and making films, making photographs as a way to speak about their daily lives. I found that very powerful and moving, and I'm very, very excited and honored that Maysoon is going to be in Cambridge for a week.
Well, thank you so much for joining us at the Arabic
You're
Hour
welcome.
today. It was a delight to hear about your work and about the Al-Mutanabi Street Project.
Thank you very much.
That was the artist Jesseca Ferguson discussing her artwork and involvement with the Al-Mutanabbi Street Starts Here project. We will be back with part 1 of our interview with poet and bookseller Beau Beausoleil after this short break.
You are watching the Arabic Hour a program of news, views, culture, cuisine, and the Arab American experience. To view today's program or any previous programs, log on to our website at www.arabichour.org.